Today I want to talk with you about basic concepts of research. But before I start with the basic concepts, let me tell you a bit about myself, because I think it's relevant. Many years ago, when I first started teaching, I taught in a secondary school, and sometimes they let me teach the first years, the early years in the secondary school, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds. And what was nice about teaching 11 and 12-year-olds was their curiosity, their enthusiasm, their interest. All of those things were very positive. The thing I hated about teaching 11-year-olds was that they'd come into the classroom and they say, do you want the date at the top of the page? Do you want the top date at the top left of the page or the top right of the page? Do you want it double underlined or single underlined? And I would say, I don't care. I don't care about that. That's your choices about how you present your work. Somebody somewhere had taught them that it was important whether the date was at the left at the top of the page or at the right at the top of the page, and whether it's single line. Who taught them that? Who taught them that that was important? I have no idea, but it seems to me there are some decisions that have to be made, but it doesn't actually matter what the decision is. I mean, in one sense, it's not important. We've got to decide as a country whether we're going to drive on the left-hand side of the road or the right-hand side of the road. It's important that we have a decision. It's important that we all do the same thing, but it's not actually particularly important what the decision is. Some countries drive on the left-hand side of the road, some countries drive on the right-hand side of the road, and they get along fine. So there's some decisions you have to make, but it doesn't actually matter what the decision is so long as you're consistent and you present your case clearly. You just have to be absolutely clear about some things because the decision is needed. So what I'm talking about in terms of basic concepts is not instructing you what the basic concepts of research are, but talking about how you deal with the basic concepts and how you think about them. And first of all, I suppose we have to come to the question, that difficult word, ontology. And ontology comes from a Greek word meaning thing, and ontology is about the things that you think your world is made up of. What kind of things are there in the world for you? Before we're researchers, we're human beings, and we have an idea about how the world works. I have an idea that the important things in the world are people, that people make decisions, that I make decisions, that you make decisions, and that the collective result of each of us making those decisions is that something happens, an outcome happens. We get some kind of result. It may not be the result that we all wanted, but we get some kind of result. That's the world that I live in. I live in a world that is inhabited by rational, decision-making people who make choices. Not everyone agrees with me. Some people think that the world is made up of businesses. The businesses decide things, they sell things, they buy things, they arrange to sign contracts, get work done, and that people go along with read the adverts that the companies produce, buy the products that the companies produce, that the people are being driven forward by the actions of companies. Now, not all economists even believe that companies are the basic thing. If there's a view of companies that companies are not particularly important, that companies are just collections of resources. This is the resource-based view, that what's important is the resources. If the resources are there, things will happen. So different people have different ideas of what it is that makes the world tick. If you think about history, years ago, fortunately years ago, we used to think that history was driven by the decisions of great men, mostly men. There was occasionally an honorary woman like Catherine the Great who was included, but great men made decisions, they waged wars. Not everyone agreed. Other people thought that what was important was some kind of spirit of the age. The spirit of the age drove people in a particular direction. One of the outstanding advocates of that idea was Leo Tolstoy in his great work War and Peace. He described the period when Napoleon marched his grand army to Moscow, and most of the history books at the time would have said Napoleon was the great shaper of history. He was the man who drove everything forward. Tolstoy, being on the Russian side perspective, didn't want to see that. He didn't want to see Napoleon as a great man, so he said, no, it was just the spirit of the age. The French nation was moving eastwards, and Napoleon was just a figurehead who happened to be at the front of the army at the time, and he was not important. What was important was the spirit of the age. So different people have different views about what's important and what drives things forward, and those decisions are about ontology. What is it in the world that you inhabit that makes things happen? So for me, I've made my decision. It's people, it's individual people making decisions that make things happen. You will come to a different view, you'll have a different view, you'll have to decide for yourself what is there in the world that you're looking at, what is important. But you'll hear people talking about this rather vaguely. They'll talk about whole school policies, indicating that it's not individual choices that matter, it's the way in which the whole group, the whole school interacts. Perfectly legitimate ways of talking about the world, but you need to be clear, and if you do talk about a whole school policy, how does it happen? How does it come about? How are you going to work with that concept? And it's that at that moment that the literature review comes into play. You read other people's work and see how they're dealing with the questions. The second major question is, how do you know? How do you know about these things? How do you find more information? And that's your question, which is epistemology. So if I believe that the things that are important in the world are individual human beings who are making choices, how do I find out about what choices they're making? How do I find out about their motivations? How do I find out about what drives them? Well, one way is to go and talk to them. Do I go and interview them? Do I talk to them? Does that tell me about their motivation? If you come to me in the course of today and say, why did you do that thing? I'll give you an answer. I'll give you an explanation. But in normal life, and remember, research is just an extension of normal life. In normal life, you wouldn't necessarily believe me. Why did you do that? Why did you tell so-and-so such and such a thing about me? And I tell you that I thought it was a good idea for people to know. And you'll say I'm just spreading gossip. You'll have your own explanation of why I do things that might be different from mine. So it's not obvious that interviewing someone, asking them why they did it, is the right way to go. Sometimes we have to make a judgment looking at what they do, and we call that observation. In research terms, if you're either a participant observer, if you're involved in the gossip circle, if you've been involved, if you're just a bystander watching, then that's non-participant observation. We have these exaggeratedly pompous words for very simple things, so don't be put off by what it's called. Get to the heart of what it means. So you're going to look at the way people have treated your area of study. How do we find out what's going on in a school? Do we look at, is it the school that's important, or is it the head teacher who's important, who makes certain decisions? Is it the committee, the board of governors? Is it the senior team of the school? Where do you look for the driving engine of a school. And once you've decided where you look for it, how do you find out about what it's going to do? Do you look at the policies that the school publishes on its website? Do you talk to insiders? Do you go and look? A lot of choices, and you'll be going to the literature review to help you sort out those concepts. And the literature review is not just a question of saying, so-and-so says the school is important, someone else says the individuals are important, this is how they see the work. No, you're developing your own ideas. I'm not interested in what Bandura said about self-efficacy. I'm interested in what you're going to say about it. So I'm interested in you looking at what Bandura said about self-efficacy and saying, I think this is the case. I don't like that particular aspect of it. I've looked at the literature and somebody else said they didn't like that aspect either. So I'm going to look at the modifications that people have made. But it's your story. You're saying, you're presenting the logic, you're presenting the evaluation of the different concepts, and you're saying, possibly you're saying, in history there's been a development. Dewey put forward this idea. Lots of people have used Dewey since he wrote his work about how people learn, and they've developed learning cycles, experiential learning cycles, call them different things, and you'll be looking at it not just to describe. That's what your supervisor will mean when they say this is too descriptive. You're there to say, I like these changes and I don't like those changes for this reason. I don't think my experience is that people don't learn in that way, don't learn in this way. So you're looking at what other people are saying and you're judging it in terms of your own experiences and explaining how you will develop the idea. And then at the end of the day, you'll say, what I'm going to mean by this. So if we take that example of self-efficacy, Bandura says, I think he says, that if you believe you can do something, that's the important thing, is if you can believe. He's in the school of thought that follows Henry Ford, who says whether you believe you're going to be successful or whether you believe you're going to fail, you are probably right. So what's important is that you have a belief in you can do things. So Bandura says, of something, there's a spread, we're on a spectrum, between I believe I can do it. So Bandura says that we're on a spectrum between I believe I can do it and I can't do it. And that seems to me to be wrong. The opposite of I believe I can do it is I don't believe I can do it. And there's a separate spectrum which says, runs from I can do it to I can't do it. So the two things are not necessarily directly connected. There are lots of people who believe they can do things but can't do it, and there are lots of people who think they can't do things and they actually turn out to be able to do them. The people who believe they can do things and can't, we call those politicians. The people who think they can't do it but can, we call them nervous, anxious learners, stressed learners. But the two things are not directly correlated. And I think that what Bandura is saying is that the spectrum is between I can't do it and I believe I can do it. And that doesn't seem to me to be. So let me go and have a look at the literature. Let me go and see how people have dealt with this. And I'm applying my logic to what I see people writing, and I discuss what I'm saying about it. And that's not a question, it's not a list. It's not Bandura says this, so-and-so says that, so-and-so says what people have picked up. It's your argument. And you'll then get to the end of this argument and you'll say, when I say self-efficacy, when I say whole school policy, when I say international students, this is what I mean. I'm going to use the word in this sense throughout the rest of my research. You're setting the groundwork, and you get to say what a particular word means. It's not like Humpty Dumpty that any word can mean anything you say, because words come with a certain historical baggage, and if you choose to use them in a way that nobody has ever used them, then it's not very convincing. And if you start using particularly words that carry strong emotional overtones, you're likely to get into trouble because people will misinterpret you. But there are no ready-made definitions of basic concepts. And your job is to work out what you want to say with your basic concepts and to make it absolutely clear. So let me go back again to my teaching experience and what I find very difficult. One of the things I find difficult is when students would come to me and say, you've set this assignment, you've set a 5,000 word assignment, do you want a report or an essay? And I'd say, well, what's the difference between a report and an essay? Some people have very clear ideas in their heads that some words have specific meanings. I think that the gist of this was that an essay was a piece of continuous text, narrative, and a report had subheadings, and it was divided up into sections. I don't care what you call it. I don't care whether you have subheadings. I do care that each paragraph that you write has a particular purpose, and if you had to put a subheading in above that paragraph, you would know what it said. Each piece of your argument ought to have a place, and every piece of that argument should be in its place. But don't attach too much specific importance to the meaning of particular words. Make clear what you want to use the word for. Make clear what the heritage of the word is in terms of the literature, and show why you choose to use it in a particular way. And at the end of the literature review, you might come down to the concept, these are the basic concepts I'm going to be using, and this is how they're going to be used, this is what they're going to mean when I use them. And you might be able to summarise that in a simple figure to impress on your reader what they're taking forward as the meaning of the words that you're going to be using. And you might draw that together in a diagram that shows what is influencing what, and present that, and you'd call that your conceptual framework, the sum total of the concepts you've discussed and how they tie together. Frankly, I'm not a great fan of the picture that summarises the concepts. If you've been clear in your writing, you shouldn't need the diagram, or if you have the diagram, you could perhaps cut down on some of the words. But I tend to be very literal when I'm looking at pictures, and I'll see people putting triangles in and circles, and I'll want to know what's the difference between a triangle and a circle. I'll want to know whether all the things in this diagram are the same kind of things. If you draw a diagram that has companies and resources and people all on the same picture, I'll be saying to myself, have you got your ontology right? So be careful about what you claim in a simple diagram, but that, I think, you would call a conceptual framework. I don't much mind whether it's drawn as a picture or whether it's just in terms of those clear definitions, but it's your work, your interpretation, and your logic that evaluates those concepts and puts them there at the beginning of your study to make absolutely clear. And I then, as your reader, have to take that on board and say, when you've used one of these special terms that you've gone to such trouble to setting out clearly what it means, I'm not at liberty to interpret it differently. I have to interpret it the way you've told me that you want to interpret it. Now, it will strike me as very odd if you say, I'm going to call a child anybody who's under the age of 50. well, I might not be so, now I'm so old, I may think of anybody under 50 as a child, but that would be a very odd usage. And if you said, I'm going to use it, well, I'd kind of have to go along with it, but I think that there are some overtones that would come with that. The word child comes with an idea of lack of power, lack of decision making, lack of autonomy. And if you tell me that everyone under 50 is a child, I'm starting to have to reorientate myself to understand the world as you describe it. But clarity is the important thing. Clarity is the most important thing. And consistency. If you say you're going to use a word in a particular way, for goodness sake, make sure that you use it throughout your research in that particular way. So these are how you deal with the basic concepts and how you put together the material that you need as a basis for communicating what you've discovered in your research.